This is a production of the Berkshire Environmental Action Team. We are based out of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, but we cover the whole county and hopefully the whole region. We protect the environment for wildlife to support the natural world that sustains us all. We do three principal things: watchdogging, education and outreach, and stewardship. You can find out about most of it on our community calendar or by subscribing to our weekly newsletter. And you can see our current weekly newsletter by clicking on that tab on our website. You can also submit events or jobs postings. You can find out what's happening in the region and the state environmentally, development-wise. And you can also see public notices for every town in Berkshire, Hampden, Hampshire, and Franklin counties. And for those of you concerned about, say, large developments, we keep an eye on anything that's environmental related, not if you are, I don't know, getting divorced or adding a deck. And we do ask that you consider contributing to help support programming like this happen. It's not free to produce, it is free to attend. We are committed to accessibility and we're very, very glad to have you all here. But your support would mean a lot and it would pay people like me and Jane. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Charley Eiseman. Charley is, he's one of the most inspiring naturalists I've ever met because he's just so incredibly excited and enamored with the natural world. And like myself, he started getting to know the natural world through plants, but then quickly became fascinated with the tiny little critters that coexist with plants. And so became quite the insect aficionado. And so I would like to introduce Charley Eiseman to talk about bug biodiversity. And there you go. You can take it away, Charley.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me, Elizabeth. And let me see, I just got to get myself situated here, sharing my screen. Oops, how's that? All right. So backyard bug biodiversity. I'm just going to launch right in because I put way too many slides into this. But there's been a lot of talk in recent years about an insect apocalypse. And the people are noticing there seem to be a lot fewer insects around than there were not that long ago. And people are acting like it's a big mystery. But if you think about it and you look around, it's really not very mysterious because every insect has a certain habitat characteristics it needs, and there's a landscape like this isn't filling many of those needs, nor is a landscape like this. And there are large areas of our country that are green, but a lot of them look like this, which, a grid of corn and soy and wheat is suitable habitat for the insects that eat those plants, but less suitable when we're spraying various chemicals on them all the time. So not really a big mystery that there would be fewer insects around over the past several decades. But luckily, those of us who are fortunate enough to have our own little chunk of land to take care of, we have an opportunity to make life better for bugs and other creatures around us. So this is what my yard in Northfield looked like when my wife Julia and I bought our house in the summer of 2013. And I'm going to show you a series of before and after pictures. This is our front yard. It was just totally unlandscaped lawn with an arborvitae hedge. And this is what it looks like now. It's got some plum and cherry trees here and some apple trees. There's a vegetable garden. Another view of the front yard. The same fruit trees. You can see the little pawpaw patch starting here. And then this is the backyard. We had just the beginnings of our first little vegetable garden and compost heap there, but now rows of raspberries and a big vegetable garden with a hoop house, some peach trees over here. Then this is back in the front yard. It's now a big meadow over there with more interspersed with more fruit trees and currants and things like that. The yard came with this one old apple tree that makes these sour green apples. We were just starting to build our chicken house there, or Julia entirely built it. I was working at the time. And then now we've got the chickens have more room to move around. And then last view of the backyard, it's just the leach field back there, but now it's got meadow and garden on it. And I'm standing in the chicken yard taking that picture. So as you can see, we've done our best to grow as much food in our yard as possible, but all the interstitial space is filled with whatever plants want to grow there. And one of those plants that comes up without any effort on our part is lots and lots of milkweed. And not just in the interstitial spaces, but even in the places where we're trying to grow food. So here's milkweed in one of our asparagus patches. And here's a little one coming up in a strawberry patch along with some violets. But it turns out most of these so-called weeds that come up in our gardens are also edible and oftentimes more nutritious than the things we're trying to grow, and they take zero effort to grow. So last year I decided to, since we weren't going anywhere all year, I challenged myself to eat as many different plants in our yard as possible. So milkweed is actually, I mean, it is poisonous later in its life, but if you pull up the shoots when they're young and boil them for 7 minutes, they're edible and delicious. So this was all just weeded out of an asparagus patch, and this is all cooked up and ready to eat. So I ended up eating 130 different plants in our yard, both plants we were growing and the other wild plants. So this is a bowl of potato leek soup. We grew the potatoes and leeks on purpose, but then it's got a bunch of hairy bitter cress on top, which turns out to be neither hairy nor bitter. It's a pretty tasty mustard, actually. But this talk is about bug biodiversity. And so the bugs I'm most interested in are the bugs that feed on plants because I've worked as a field botanist for 20 years or so. I spent a lot of time looking at plants and became especially fascinated by leaf miners, which are insect larvae that spend their lives feeding between the epidermal layers of leaves, and they make characteristic patterns as they feed. And I've spent the past 10 years putting together a complete guide to the leaf miners of North America. So I challenged myself to see how many different leaf miners I could find in our yard last year, as well as how many plants I could eat. Oh, and so this book I put together right now exists only as an ebook, but a few brave souls have printed out the whole thing. So this, Mike Farrow in South Carolina sent me this picture with my first book for scale there. Not a practical guide to carry around with you there. And then just yesterday, I have a couple of tracker friends in South Africa who had it more professionally printed in hard copies, a 3-volume set there. But I just have it on my computer. So I ended up finding 212 species of leaf miners, including 9 species of sawflies in 2 different families, 14 species of beetles in 4 families, 74 species of flies in 4 families, and 113 moths in 18 families. So I'm not going to show you all of them right now, but I'll show you some of my favorites. Fisheria Corsitella is an unremarkable moth as an adult, but its leaf mine is one of my all-time favorites. It decorates the ceiling of its mine with these purple streaks for no apparent reason. And some other moths in the same family, Tisheriidae, also make pretty fancy mines. So Coptodiscus Blender, these first 2 are both on oak. This one makes a trumpet-shaped mine and decorates the ceiling with little brown crescents. And then this one makes a trumpet mine on apple leaves and decorates it with little white crescents. Another apple leaf miner is Coptodiscus Blender, also known as the resplendent shield bearer. The larvae make these tiny little mines, and then when they're done feeding, they cut out an oval leaf piece and then they drop to the ground on a strand of silk wearing that leaf piece like a turtle shell. Then they walk around with it until they find a suitable place to attach it with a little button of silk, and then it becomes their cocoon. And this is what the adult moth looks like. This is just 2.5 millimeters long, so a pretty tiny moth. And the only moths tinier than that are the nepticulid moths. Most of them are just around 2 millimeters long. Stigmella corsipulcella is another oak leaf miner. These are its mines. It has bright yellow larvae. Most nepticulids exit their mines and spin little cocoons about the size of sesame seeds. Found a bunch of nepticulids around the yard, including Stigmella scintillans, a species I'd never seen before anywhere. It was right there in a hawthorn leaf by the mailbox. Not all the nepticulids make such artistic mines. This is kind of a messy one in a hazelnut leaf, but the moth makes up for its lack of artistry with fancy silvery spots on its wings. Ectoademia quadrinotata, that refers to the 4 spots on each wing. Cosmopteryx Gemiferella, another gorgeous moth that pretty much all Cosmopteryx species look just like this, and they all feed on various grasses and sedges and are hard to tell apart. But this particular one only mines leaves of grasses in the genus Dicanthelium, including deer tongue grass. So this leaf, actually what caught my eye with this leaf was this here, which turned out to just be variegation. It's not a mine at all, but this part here turned out to be the cocoon of that Cosmopteryx larva. It had overwintered as a larva in the basal rosette of the plant, mining those leaves, and then when it was done feeding, it moved up to a stem leaf and mined in from the edge just to spin its cocoon there. This is another one that specializes in deer tongue grass. It makes this long, narrow mine, and then it turns into a blotch, and it cuts out a perfect circle, sort of like that Coptodiscus larva, but not cutting all the way through the leaf. And then it folds that circle in half, so it has a semicircular pupal case that drops off the leaf. I see Diane Olson raised her hand.
I just want to tell you that I'm so happy to see all these beautiful creatures.
Great. I'm happy to share them with you. So this is the adult of that last deer tongue grass moth, Cycloplacis panicifoliella. It's such a weird moth that no one can even decide what superfamily it belongs in. They've done genetic analysis and it just keeps getting kicked out of different groups. So it's just floating out there unclassified. One more deer tongue grass miner. This one makes a puffy, what's called a tentiform mine. It spins silk inside the leaf that as the silk dries, it contracts and bunches up the leaf. And this moth doesn't have a name yet. It appears to be in the genus Leucospilapteryx, but its name remains to be determined. Parectipa plantagenicella was named because the person who described it thought the leaves he collected were plantain leaves, but they turned out to be Fleabane. That the basal leaves of Fleabane do kind of look like plantain, but so this is the mine of that species. Philonericter blancardella is a leaf miner of apple leaves. Its common name is the spotted tentiform leaf miner. Most of these things don't have common names, but a few of the economically important ones do. So the tentiform, again, refers to the shape of the mine, and the spotted, refers to the upper surface. The larva characteristically picks out little bits of the upper leaf tissue. Phyllic Nistus Vitifoliella is a grape leaf miner. It makes these long, narrow, linear mines. And it has a relative, Phyllic Nistus vitagenella, that also makes linear mines on grape, but they are more superficial. They just look like a snail track. And the adult moth looks exactly the same. In fact, the leaf mines are the only known way to distinguish these two species at this point. Buccalatrix angustata, I love that little pom-pom on its head, mines in aster leaves. It starts out making this long, narrow, linear mine, and then it pops out and often moves to another leaf to make more irregular, blotchy mines. This is another upper and lower surface of one leaf that a larva has made 4 separate mines in, each time entering at the basal end of the leaf. And species in this genus Buccalatrix are known as the ribbed cocoon maker moths because they pupate in these ornate cocoons with longitudinal ribs. And some species, before they spin that cocoon, they'll erect a little fence encircling the area where they're going to make the cocoon. And that apparently protects them from ants while they're working on their cocoon. Monfa Terminilla, yet another gorgeous and tiny moth that makes a not so fancy leaf mine. This is in Enchanter's Nightshade. We're looking at the lower surface of the leaf, and the mine is totally clean because the larva has pushed all of its frass out of little holes along the edges. Coleophora species are case-bearing moths. There are like 150 species with names, and there are another 300 or so that haven't been named yet. But this species mines leaves of blackberries. So here's its leaf mine, and over here is the larva in its portable house, which is made out of, it cut out pieces of one of its leaf mines and reinforced them with silk. There's a little thorn from the leaf that it cut its case out from. And then they chew into the leaves from their cases. So they make these big, clean looking blotch mines with a conspicuous entrance hole on the underside. And they're totally clean because the larva is dumping all of its frass out the back end of its case. This is another species on black birch with a different shaped case. I took a backlit photo so you can see the larva inside its case and with its head extended into the leaf there. So this species has a bivalved case, but this other larva I found on the same black birch sapling is another species that makes a trivalved case. So sometimes when they're on the same plants, you can distinguish them by their case architecture. Marmara Viburnella is a species that I got to name a few years ago. It took me and Julia 5 years of visiting Nantucket to slowly work out the whole life cycle of this moth and finally raise 3 adults, so we were able to describe the species. And then last year, for the first time, I found a mine right in our yard on a viburnum. So the life cycle is that sometime in July, an egg is laid on the leaf and the larva mines this long, narrow squiggle entering the midrib. In this case, for whatever reason, it turned around and made a little branch, but then it always ends up going down the petiole and then down along the stem, keeps going down the stem. In fact, this larva is still in the stem now, and in the spring, it will keep mining in the stem until about June, and then it'll cut out a little flap in the bark at the end of its mine and spin its cocoon under that flap. This is Julia showing off one of the tallest tall blue lettuce plants I've ever seen. I think it was right next to the compost pile, so maybe that's why this plant was so happy. But on the underside of one of those leaves, I found this little squiggle that's of another heretofore unknown Marmara species that I hope it doesn't take me another 5 years to raise this one and find out what it is. But I wasn't able to raise any this year. Caloptilia ceratinella is a species that overwinters as adults. And in fact, we had one of these just hanging out on the ceiling of our bathroom for a couple of weeks in December. But this species mines leaves of black cherry. It starts out it can be on either leaf surface, but starts out making the superficial looking mine. And then it turns into a more tentiform mine that can completely fold over. But by this time, the larva has exited its mine and wandered over to another leaf and rolled it into a cone to keep feeding in that. And that's what most Caloptilia species do on their various plants. This is a quaking aspen leaf that blew into our driveway from across the road. And I noticed this little bulge on the petiole there, which I recognize as the sign of a moth that starts out with an egg laid in the leaf blade, and then the larva mines along the midrib into the petiole and forms a gall there. This is a more well-developed gall. You can see the mine in this one too. So Ectoademia Popula. This is another quaking aspen leaf that blew into our driveway. And see this little green patch here. This is a sign of a related Ectoademia species, but this one does the opposite. It lays its egg on the petiole and the larva mines up the petiole into the leaf blade. And then its feeding activities prevent the leaf from turning yellow in this one spot. And then the larva is able to keep mining in that green patch after the leaf has fallen to the ground. So during the day, the larva hides in the petiole, and then at night it comes out and keeps feeding in that green patch between these two walls of frass that it's lined its tunnel with. And until a few years ago, I would have said the species making those green patches on the aspen was Ectoademia argyropeza, which is a really common introduced European species. But I collected some of those leaves just down the road a few years ago, just so I could raise the larvae to get pictures of adults of that species. But some of the adults that emerged were this other species that their DNA matched specimens that were collected in Manitoba in a Malaise trap, but otherwise the species is totally unknown and doesn't have a name, but it's a native species that does exactly the same thing as that introduced species. Okay, that's it for the moths. I'll talk about a few flies. This daisy fleabane plant here was the very first wildflower to pop up after we didn't mow our lawn for a couple of weeks after we moved in. And when I went over to that plant, it had 3 different leaf miners on it, but one of them was making these linear mines with frass in alternating trails. This is characteristic of a lot of the agromyzid flies because they lie on their sides instead of lying on their bellies or on their backs. So they end up pooping on one side and then rolling over and pooping on the other side. But this species, the larva pops out and makes this black puparium. A puparium is the larva's hardened skin, and then the pupa is actually inside that. But the adult that emerged from that was a new species that I named Phytomyza erigeronis with Owen Lonsdale, who's an agromyzid fly specialist in Canada. This is one of 3 species we described from specimens I collected right in our yard, and I refound all of those species last year. So the second of those species is Ophiomya parda. Parda means leopard, and that refers to the spotted pattern of frass along the length of the mine. This mine appears to be empty. It looks like the mine just ends there, but the larva actually keeps going on the underside of the leaf and hides its puparium there. That's the adult of that species. The third species is another Ophiomya, Euthamii, which mines in grass-leaved goldenrod leaves. And it does the opposite. It starts out mostly mining on the underside of the leaf, but then when it's almost mature, it switches to the upper side and it makes this black puparium there. And then this species, the type specimen was from North Carolina, but some of the paratypes came from my yard. This is a beggar ticks leaf miner that always starts at the tip of the leaf. Sometimes it makes this more stretched out mine, and sometimes it's really contorted at the tip. This is one I found on black raspberry last spring, and I was excited when I found this because it reminded me of this mine I found at a BioBlitz in Connecticut a few years ago. And the adult that emerged from this mine a year later is the only known specimen of Agromyza princei, which I named after Prince because raspberry beret. We'll have to wait until next spring to see if it is in fact the same species in my yard. And then this was literally at our doorstep. I saw this little brown spot at the edge of an oregano leaf that just because I was really trying to find every last leaf miner, I checked that out to see, is that really a leaf mine? Because I don't know of any leaf miners on oregano. And sure enough, there was a little puparium on the underside of the leaf tucked in there. And over the next few weeks, I found some more larvae mining. And it turns out there's a European species that's never been found in North America that makes mines exactly like that on oregano. So that's, I assume that's the species I raised. I haven't sent them off to Owen to identify them yet. Oh, and in the process of raising that, I got 2 different species of parasitic wasps. There are lots of little, half the time when I'm raising these leaf miners, I get little wasps instead of the things I'm trying to raise. This is apple mint, which we like to stuff into pitchers of water to make sun tea. And one day I looked over at Julia's glass and I noticed a leaf mine in one of the leaves in her glass. And I went back to the patch and it took me a few weeks to find any more mines, but eventually I raised some adults. And this seems to be another European species that's never been found in North America before. And now some things that aren't new and exciting, but just to show you some of the diversity of fly mines. So Calicomyza promissa starts out making a green kind of branchy mine, and then the more mature mine is white and puffy. And on the inside, the puparium is perched on a little pedestal of frass. Not quite sure how it does that, but it's always like that. Nemoromyza posticata makes these brown, kind of ugly mines, but then when you backlight them, they have this beautiful herringbone pattern of tooth marks on them. Cerodontha angulata is yet another leaf miner of deer tongue grass. I think that's 5 I've shown you at this point on this one species of grass. And there are fern leaf miners too. This one on interrupted fern is Cheirosia filicis. And then there's some leaf mining beetles like this flea beetle on plantain. The adults nibble little holes in the leaves, and then their larvae make these linear leaf mines. And in June, they drop out and burrow into the ground to pupate. The adults emerge in July, and then they just kind of lay low until the following spring. Sumatrosis inequalis is a miner of various plants in the aster family, but black-eyed Susan wasn't known to be one of its hosts until I found this mine along our driveway last summer. At this end of the mine, you can see its little egg inserted in a pit that the female chewed in the leaf. And at the other end, here's the larva making stringy frass that's totally different from anything a fly or moth would do. This shiny bluish black beetle is another aster and goldenrod leaf miner, but it collects all its frass into a circular patch and ends up pupating there. And it always lays its egg right at the edge of the leaf and covers it with poop. So all these leaf miners have little idiosyncrasies that help you identify them. Kalipas Bicolor, yet another deer tongue grass specialist. Maybe this is the 5th one. And it pushes all its frass out of the edge of the leaf. There are some leaf mining weevils like this one on black cherry. She uses her long snout to chew little holes in the midrib. Her beak is right in the midrib there, and then she turns around and lays an egg in each hole that she's chewed. And the larvae make these linear mines that all meet at the tip of the leaf and turn into a big blotch, and each one spins its own little circular cocoon. And then some leaf mining sawflies. Phonusa pumila is one of several birch leaf miners. They make just kind of ugly blotch mines, a whole bunch of them together. But then there's, on that same birch sapling, I found a different species that makes neater mines with the frass is all packed into it. The egg is always inserted at the tip of a leaf tooth, and then the frass gets packed into the beginning there. So the other book project I'm just starting to work on is a complete guide to Sawfly larvae of North America. There are only about 40 leaf mining sawfly species, but there are about 1,200 other sawflies, and there's no guide to their larvae. In fact, only about a quarter of them even have known host plants. So there's a lot left to learn about these. And I have about 5 minutes of free living sawfly larvae here if we've got time for that. I think we do. But feel free to interrupt with questions at any point. So on that same paper birch sapling at the corner of our yard where I found 2 species of leaf mining sawflies, I also found 3 different species of free living sawfly larvae. So there's this green one with a little black stripe behind its eye. There's this one that feeds in big flocks all along the edges of the leaves. And when I went to check on them one day, there was this ichneumon wasp checking on them too. These lay eggs on sawfly larvae, and their larvae eat the sawfly larvae. So it's coming pretty close to laying an egg right there. Another of the birch feeding species on that one sapling, little yellow spots along its back. This turned into this beautiful green adult, which it's so green, even the little stigmas on its leaves, its wings are green. And then this was on a different little birch sapling in the yard. This species is all green, but with a little pink butt. And this is what the adult looks like. I don't know. So I'm sending all my sawflies to Dave Smith, who's been studying sawflies at the Smithsonian since the 60s, but no one's been allowed to go into the Smithsonian since last March. So haven't had any IDs on sawflies since then, but I've got a bunch to give him when he's ready. Sterictophora species always start out making this perfectly sinusoidal slit in the edges of cherry leaves. This is just the other side of the same larva. This one, there is a tiny little quaking aspen sapling in there that came up in the middle of our front yard that I found 2 different species of sawflies on. There's this one with the orange head, and then there are these in the genus Calaroa, which are known as slug sawflies because they're slimy and they don't seem to have legs or heads, but if you look at them just right, you can see they have cute little faces. They're kind of covering their faces as they eat. And this is what the adult of that one looks like. There isn't a known Calaroa species on Aspen, so this could be a new species or just one that has a name but doesn't have a known host plant. Most Calaroa species feed on oak. This one was on a Chinese chestnut and had nice little yellow patches on the sides. And on a pussy willow at the edge of our yard, there are these little clusters of larvae that I collected when they were very young and got to watch their development. They developed these black masks on their faces and spots along their sides. And that's the adult of that one. Even that arborvitae hedge had some sawflies in it. This larva actually appeared in a little sprig that I collected because it had this cocoon on it, and I wanted to rear the moth from that cocoon, but there turned out to be a sawfly egg in that sprig. It developed into this stripy larva, and I had actually seen what was maybe its mother laying eggs a month earlier in the hedge. On lady fern, there were no known sawflies feeding on lady fern, but I found 2 different ones right by our front door. This one, both of them turn out to be species that are known to feed on ferns, but not lady ferns specifically. So Anubimus flavipes, and this one with a little black hat and black nose is Thrinax Albedo Picta, which looks kind of like an ichneumon wasp. And every time I collected a new fern sprig to try to feed these larvae, there would be additional tiny larvae or eggs already on it. So it was really hard to keep track of who was who as I was taking pictures of them through their development. But this is a Sawfly larva just about to hatch. You can see its little eyes there. And this is an egg of one of those fern leaf mining flies. There are leaf rolling sawflies too. So this is a little shad bush we planted next to our garage. All of these little leaf rolls were made by Sawfly larvae, and here's the culprit in there. The leaf unrolled. The whole family Pamphyliidae are leaf rollers. And later in the summer, that same shad bush, I walked by it and noticed it didn't have very many leaves left, and I looked at one of the patches of remaining leaves and found this whole row of Sawfly larvae, which looked kind of similar to the ones on the birch, but it's a whole other family, family Argidae, and I got both males and females, adults from those. This is the male, and the female's bright red. Lying in that patch of milkweed by the driveway one day, I noticed this tiny larva nibbling holes in a goldenrod leaf. There's not a sawfly that's known to feed on goldenrods, so I collected this one to raise it. And this is what the mature one looks like. I know what the genus is, but I'll have to wait till spring to find out who the adult is. This lovely one defoliates our current plants every year. This one, fell into my hand while I was picking raspberries one day, and it did turn out to be something that eats raspberry leaves. This kind of powdery, waxy one eats jewelweed leaves. This lovely one was on elderberry, and these yellow things are ichneumon wasp eggs, so likely not going to get an adult sawfly out of that one. So I went back to the elderberry to look for more larvae, and I just found one more, which also had an ichneumon wasp egg on it. So much for that. That same willow that had already had 2 generations of that earlier willow sawfly I showed you, then had 3 generations of these on it. So it didn't have very many leaves left at the end of the year, but when I looked in mid-September, there were several of these ichneumon wasps all laying eggs on the larvae, so there will be fewer of those next year. And this is the last one I found. Sawfly larva number 49 for the year was on one of our hazelnut bushes. It's lovely yellow spots. And when it shed its skin just before burrowing into a jar of soil, I gave it to pupate. This is what it looked like. So if you let your yard turn from this into this, you too could have all these leaf miners and sawflies and various other bugs around you. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, and so this is my website here. Bug Tracks is my blog, where if you want all the gory details of my yard list projects, I was blogging all of those things I was finding throughout last year. And on my Twitter account, in October, I started just tweeting a picture of one new species from my yard every day, not just leaf miners and sawflies, but anything goes. So we'll see how long I keep that up. All right, Rose.
Hi, first of all, thank you for the vindication. As somebody whose yard looks like that and is from a long line of home and garden center gardeners, it's really great to know that I'm doing something that's helping biodiversity. And you mentioned raising them. What's involved in raising them to find out what they are?
Well, with the leaf miners, I basically just put them in little vials and wait to see what comes out. And some of them need a little further attention, like if the flies come out and form their puparia, I take out the leaves so they don't get moldy, and I stuff in a little square of toilet paper and put a few drops of water on that so they don't dry out.
Oh, cool.
The Sawfly larvae are more involved because they need to burrow into soil. So I have little baby food jars of soil that I let them burrow into. And a lot of them need to overwinter before the adults emerge. So I keep them in the little fridge in the basement over the winter, so they know that winter has passed. And some of the Sawflies also need to bore into twigs. I gave them sumac twigs to bore into. So you kind of have to, if you don't know the life cycle, you have to experiment to give them what they want.
Wild. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll stop sharing so we can see each other's faces more. I think saw someone else had, Jessica has a question.
Hi. First of all, I want to say those are the most amazing photographs. That's just truly amazing, the photographs. But I had a question about the moths. Is that like the feathery scales at the end of their wings? Is that kind of a defining characteristic of leaf miners? Like if I see something like that, do I know it's a leaf miner or?
Well, all moths actually have a fringe like that, but on the tiny moths, it's proportionally larger.
Okay.
And there are lots of tiny moths that aren't leaf miners. Some are leaf rollers or leaf tires, or and fruits are as stem borers. But
Okay.
Yeah.
But burrowers a lot, many. So
so there are 1,200 named species of moths in North America that are leaf miners for at least part of their development, and that's out of 12,000 described species. So 1 in 10 species of moths and butterflies is a leaf miner at least part of the time.
okay.
But most of them are just like 3 millimeters long. So most moths that you notice probably aren't leaf miners.
Right. The other thing was the agromyzids. So I used to work for the USDA, and one of the things we looked for in commodities coming in from Europe were agromyzids. And I don't know what the varieties, I really don't know the details about them. All I know is that we were supposed to look for those little pupas, puparium. And so when you're seeing a European one, I keep thinking, I'm like, whoa, is that one I missed? Kind of like many species, like, oh no, like how many are coming in through like commercial commodities and other or just accidentally, I don't, so like, is there a large variety of European? I just thought I didn't know there was more than one. My understanding was that it was actually something used almost as a, for other pest control in some greenhouses in Europe. Oh, that was something different, sorry, but.
Well, there are like 850-ish species of agromyzids in North America. 50 of them, Owen Lonsdale and I have named in the past 5 years. So there are a lot more to be discovered. And there are, not that many that are introduced, but there are definitely multiple introduced species.
I had no idea. I just thought there was one that I was looking for. Thank you.
I think Bonner had a question.
Son of a bitch. Sorry.
You, I gotta sorry, I raised
I
my
didn't say anything worse.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get rid of.
Okay, can I ask?
Sure.
Okay, are all these species very specific as to their whatever type of species of plant they're eating? And also, you said about them, burrowing into, you gave them sumac twigs, and I thought, do they care what kind of twig you give them? I mean, sumac twigs are very big, very pithy in the center, and kind of fragile, right, or easy to burrow into.
So first question, out of the vast majority of leaf miners just feed on one plant genus. There are a few, like some of the agricultural pest agromyzid flies are extreme generalists. There are some that are known from like 30 or 40 different families of plants, but they are definitely the exceptions. And then the sumac twig thing, Dave Smith, the sawfly specialist, had warned me that some of the fern feeding ones in particular need to bore into something rather that they won't burrow into soil or just spin a cocoon in paper. So suggested a few things, and it doesn't need to be sumac, but he said he's used old wine corks or corrugated cardboard. But I was thinking, what is around my yard that would be nice to bore into? And I thought of the pithy center of sumac, and they went right into that. They definitely appreciated having that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Miriam Curland.
Yeah, hi. What impact do these leaf miners have on the plants themselves? Do they have any significant impact?
It's a minimal impact because they're really, they're just making that one little squiggle, but the rest of the leaf is able to go on photosynthesizing. The main exception is the ones that mine in spinach and chard, which are related to the fern mining one I showed. Those just kind of make the whole leaf crumple up. And so we are constantly checking our spinach for those and picking the leaves as soon as we notice eggs. And we still eat them if they just have eggs, but if the larvae are too far along, then the chickens get to eat them. But yeah, otherwise, they really don't cause any significant harm to the plants. And I should mention, even things that do completely defoliate plants, if they're native insects that have native parasites and predators that keep them in check, then the plants generally do fine. So we planted some spice bushes right next to our house, and spice bush swallowtails showed up and ate all of the leaves, but the plants came back the next year and they were better than ever. So it all works out. Anybody else?
Jennifer Kimball has a question about, do birds eat leaf miners?
There are a few documented examples of that. There was actually just a couple of years ago, someone that I've been corresponding with has been studying, I guess she's an ornithologist, and she was looking at the invasive honeysuckles and how birds were interacting with them. And she noticed that the chickadees were picking at the leaves. And when she looked more closely, she saw those tentiform mines, like I showed on the apple leaves, they had learned that there's something tasty inside those, and they were picking them out.
Thank you. Raya? You're still muted.
I just saw a question in the chat, but I guess.
I'm sorry, Raya, I asked you to unmute and then muted you accidentally.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, hi. Would you say in general, there's a month or spring, summer, fall season when there's the most emergent activity from the larva stage, or like what would be the most critical month to really be careful? I work as a gardener, and so now I'm really going to be paying more attention.
There are, well, the height of the growing season is definitely when there's the most going on, but there are some species that only come out first thing in the spring. There are some that are even in the overwintering leaves right now. But in terms of things in your garden, those tend to be, the ones that are garden pests tend to be pretty well timed to when the plants are around. So yeah, I'm not sure what to say about avoiding them exactly. But actually, it does seem like maybe the spinach and chard ones are mostly in the spring. That one may only have one generation a year, but some of them have multiple generations.
And can it take a long time between the insect laying its egg and emerging from the plant?
Hatching, you mean, or when the adult emerges?
When the bug is done with kneading the leaf or the plant.
So most of them, they'll hatch after a few days, and then the larva will feed for a week or two. And then depending on the species, it either pupates in the leaf or drops to the ground, and then the adult will either emerge a week or two after that or not until the next year, depending on the species. So it's hard to say any
Okay,
general.
I know it's hard to be general. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think Bonner had a question.
Yes, thanks. How did you get those remarkable photographs?
I have, let's see. This is my camera that I use here. I don't know if you can. So it's got this big telescoping, well, it's the lens that's the important part more than the camera, but it's a digital SLR. And when this lens is the Nikon or Canon MPE 65 millimeter. And when it's shrunk in like this, the field of view is 22 millimeters. And when it's telescoped all the way out, it's 4 millimeters. And it's really hard to find your subject when the field of view is that small. But even it's a very, there's a steep learning curve with that lens for sure, because you have to, the working distance is just a few inches. And then there's no focus ring. So you just have to move in and out at increments of less than a millimeter because there's very little depth of field. And the thing is you're trying to photograph is moving.
And the lighting, I mean, sometimes you are able to get them backlit. Yeah,
so these flash heads here, these are called the twin light flash.
Yeah.
And so it's bombarding the subject with light from both sides. And to get it backlit, the close-ups that were backlit, I do that by taking off a flash head and putting the leaf over it. So and you kind of have to blink when you take the picture because the flash is going in your eye. And then the ones that where I took that were backlit in the field, those I was just using the sun as my background.
And are these photographs all in your ebook?
Well, the ones from last year aren't, but photos like that are in the ebook. The first several hundred pages are pictures of adults and kind of general information about the different groups, and then the next 1,700 pages are keys to the leaf mines that you'd find on each genus of plant, and they're all illustrated with pictures of the leaf mines.
Thank you.
And a part of the reason I haven't pursued putting that book in print is that I just keep adding to it. So I'm already halfway through making a revised second edition that's already another 100 pages longer.
Charlie, Pamela Hardcastle asks if you have a list of favorite plants in your works. Pamela, do you mean in his ebook?
Yeah, do you mean favorite plants of leaf miners or favorite plants for planting to attract insects in general, or what's?
Well, I thought the backyard looked good and messy. I really liked it a lot. And obviously you're attracting a real variety of leaf miners, and I can't imagine that you're not attracting other critters in the same vein. So I've often had people ask me, well, what should I plant on my septic top, and it sure wouldn't, it'd be nice to have a list of what you've tossed out there,
Yeah, well, so I started out by just not mowing between where we were planting fruit trees and shrubs and just seeing what would come in. And a lot of, if you live near woods or any kind of nature, then there will probably be seed source for a lot of things that are used by a wide variety of insects, like all the asters and goldenrods, the milkweed, the fleabane, all of these things we didn't plant, they just showed up. A lot of them are on wind dispersed seeds, evening primrose too. And then we've just recently have started actually planting things, but really the insects that are most, or the plants that are most, that have the most diversity of insects on them are the most common plants, really. So in terms of woody plants, oaks have more species of moths and leaf miners on them than anything else. Like there are I've something like 150 species of leaf miners on oaks, and then there are all kinds of other butterflies and moths and sawflies that feed on them. But you can, yeah, there are a lot of people have developed lists of things, recommended plants for attracting insects. So Doug Tallamy, who wrote the book Bringing Nature Home, he has a website with recommended plants. And there's also Richard Jagir is a professor at UMass Dartmouth, I believe, and he's been also developing a list of plants that he recommends people to plant. He has more of a pollinator angle. There are certain bees that will only visit certain flowers, but he also has started listing plants of declining butterfly species and things like that.
Thank you. I like the idea of diversity. I mean, it's good that we're doing plantings for butterflies, but we need to sort of branch out and have it be a wider.
Yeah.
So thank you. That was good.
Charlie, Rose is wondering, are you interested in pictures of what people are finding in the yards, or like, are you interested in tracking what species are where?
Well, I've made an iNaturalist project called Leaf Miners of North America, where people, if anything that's added to that project, I will see. I'm most interested in seeing unusual things, which if you're just starting out, you won't know what's unusual really, but mines on less common plants, for instance, are just weird. If you've been looking at leaf mines for a while, you'll notice things that you haven't noticed before. And those are the ones that are more interesting to me. But definitely anyone's welcome to put things in that project, and I'll check them out. And there's also on bugguide.net, there's an ID request section, and there's also an unidentified leaf mine section that people can post pictures right to there. So that's the easiest, or the most convenient for me way to do it, so my email doesn't get clogged up with things.
I just put the link to that iNaturalist project in the chat, everyone.
Great. Well, you found the project. I guess it's just like iNaturalist / Leaf Miners of North America or something.
Ariel wants to know, are the moths that you showed us so tiny that we would notice them? Would they seem to be the size of tiny fleas or no-see-ums?
They are, most of them are about the size of a leaf popper. So like 3 or 4 millimeters. The smallest ones are 2 millimeters, and some are more like a centimeter. So yeah.
Thanks. I'm also just so blown away that you're showing us this whole world that most of us don't usually notice, and that you are showing us this world in such exquisite detail. Thank you, Charlie.
My pleasure.
You show us what a meter for a milliliter looks like?
A millimeter, well, it's small, but here's the ruler. So millimeter is between those two fingernails there. Pretty tiny.
I think maybe last one, or close to last question, is Diane's asking, are all leaf miners and leaf, I think she meant eaters, sawfly?
So the leaf miners there are all those moths and flies and beetles and a few sawflies, and then the external leaf eaters. There are all kinds of caterpillars, like butterfly and moth caterpillars that munch on leaves, and beetles that munch on leaves. I'm working on sawfly larvae because they're like leaf miners. There's very little known about them. So I try to make guides to things that there aren't guides for.
Are they called sawflies because of why are they called sawflies?
The female has a serrated ovipositor that she uses to saw into the plant tissue and insert her eggs.
Oh my. And Jessica, I'm sorry, Jessica, I realized you had your hand up for a while and I forgot about you up there reading the chat. Are there any examples of some friction with neighbors when you let your yard go more wild, and how would you respond? I want to let my yard go a bit, but I'm also worried about neighbors' feelings about it. Fair enough.
Well, the previous landowners here put up that arborvitae fortress along the road, and then there's our spruces along the north edge of the yard, and then there's kind of a little wild buffer between our yard and the next neighbor's yard on the other side, of which actually our previous owner had bought a little sliver of that neighbor's land and then just let it go kind of wild. So in our particular setting, there's no occasion for friction with neighbors. And we even have normal looking perennials planted along the driveway. So when people walk by, they're none the wiser.
Speaking of the hydrangea and viburnum.
Right.
Oh, Julia would also like everyone to know that you have very nice neighbors.
That's true. Except for that ATV guy who's renting. He's nice enough.
Well, I think we're about done here unless, oh yes, Bonner, go ahead.
I noticed that this, Elizabeth, that you are recording this session. Yeah. So does that mean that, like, if I wanted to relive it, I could?
You indeed could. As
how?
As I can edit it, it will be up on our Beat YouTube page, and I will also send out a link. And if you really want to stay up to date, then you should subscribe to the Beat News, and then you can, you know, get all the happenings. And whenever Charley posts something, I do my best to spread it around as well.
I appreciate that.
Oh, Julia says, we do have friends that put up wildlife habitat signs, which helps the neighbors understand that the wildness is intentional. Thank you, Julia. I was going to mention that. There have been a few folks recently who have been putting up pollinator-friendly yard signs. There are various ones out there. The Xerxes Society has them, and Western Mass Pollinator Networks has them. And they can be a really interesting conversation starter, and maybe you could get your community to pass a pollinator-friendly resolution and stop using, you know, pesticides and herbicides on public lands.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I forgot to give a helpful answer to that question.
Well, does anyone have any final questions or thoughts before we all go? Well, I really want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Charley for being so generous with his time. I'm really delighted to see everyone. It's lovely to get to see your faces at least briefly monthly. I want to remind you all to join us next third Tuesday of the month. We will have Eric Doucette. He is a biology and ecology professor from Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. And it'll be same place, same time, 6 p.m. on the third Tuesday. Thank you, Charley Eiseman, for your inspiring work, for your stalwart pursuit of excellence and insect investigation. And we'll have you back sometime soon.
Great. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.